Thank you. I think we have some questions. Mr. Ting?
Well, my only question was, usually the LAO has recommendations. Does LAO not have any recommendations?
Not at this time. I think in our understanding was that our role in the hearing would be primarily of a descriptive nature.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I want to jump in here just so I don't miss my opportunity to give voice to some concerns raised to me by our local First Five Commission in San Mateo County. You've talked about this issue, rising administrative costs at a time when there's a declining source of revenue. Locally, there are some program costs that were unanticipated when the initial funding measure was passed. Can you just talk a little bit about, I appreciate the reporting here, but sort of what the roadmap is going forward in terms of funding streams? Is there a way to fund this licensing program without draining money that trickles down to the counties? There's a basic fiscal concern here, and can you speak to where we go in the future here?
Well, the supplemental reporting language set us on a path to consider, set the legislature on a path, I should say, to consider a variety of funding options for the program going forward. So that process started with the initial report, which gave us from BOE, which gave us a sense of sort of what the costs are, sort of a little bit of more detail on that. The stakeholder meeting where stakeholders presented ideas for how to fund the program going forward, and then just yesterday we received the final component of the supplemental report from BOE, which lays out, I believe it was 11 options going forward for funding the program, and sort of each of those were distinct ideas submitted by stakeholders, and certainly those are options the legislature can look at going forward.
Do you have any suggestions for us? I mean, we'll certainly read through the report, but I have you sitting here today. Can you just provide a little color to your testimony? What are some of the ideas that might gain some traction, which are fiscally feasible? Can you just give us a little bit of additional insight?
Well, we haven't assessed the fiscal feasibility of any of the ideas, but I can just give you a sense of sort of what's in there. So there are 11 total. I'll just give you a couple examples. The first one that was mentioned was to make the so currently the fees that are assessed on retailers are on a one-time basis. So you register, you pay your retailer, you pay $100, and then as long as your license doesn't lapse, you can renew without paying a fee from then on. If you have any issues and then you have to re-register, then you might have to pay the $100 again. So one idea that was put forth was to have the fee paid every year, possibly of a different amount than is charged currently. So that's one option that stakeholders submitted. So there was a mix of ideas, some of which involved additional revenues, some of which involved continuing the current practice, others of which involved trying to find cost savings. So those are all, I mean, we have not, just since we received it yesterday, we haven't conducted a thorough analysis of any of the options.
Okay, just wanted to, Mr. Chair, if I could allow Mr. Parrott the opportunity, if you had any additional thoughts at the outset here.
Okay, thank you. My name is Richard Parrott. I'm the acting chief of the Special Taxes Policy and Compliance Division at the Board of Equalization. Mr. Kirstein did touch on the stakeholders meeting. I was here today to report to you on that. If I could just give you some brief highlights. With regard to the supplemental reporting language, the BOE did conduct the stakeholders meeting on November 13th, 2014. In anticipation of the meeting, we reached out to about 39,000 stakeholders, including licensees, fund recipients, and other industries within the programs. Our meeting was attended by 53 people, and we received verbal proposals at the meeting and also written proposals subsequent to the meeting. 11 proposals were written in the final report that was transmitted to the legislature yesterday. Mr. Kirsten did touch on a couple of the highlights of some of those suggestions. One was to Increase the tax on cigarettes and tobacco products was another alternative that was in the report. Another one was to begin taxing products such as electronic cigarettes, dissolvables, and other types of products. I'm happy to answer any other questions with regard to the report. I know it was sent over yesterday, and we did get it out to the stakeholders this morning after it was posted to the BOE website.
Before getting to you, Mr. Cooper, I just have a quick question to follow up on Mr. Mullen's question. Excuse me. The suggestion you had about continuing every year collecting a certain amount on the license, the one-time paid license fee, how much do you expect future years would, in perpetuity, would generate, given at what recommended price of a license? And I'm not sure if you've had an opportunity to pencil that out, but if you have some thoughts on it, or Mr. Parrott, if you have some thoughts on that.
Sure. There were two proposals regarding recurring license fees that were specific amounts proposed from the stakeholders. One was for a $750 annual retailer license fee, and another one was for an annual retailer license fee of about $248. Those were the amounts that were proposed. We've had an ongoing licensee population at the retailer level of 37,000 licensees. That's been fairly static for about the last 6 or 7 years. So we're seeing we issue about 6,000 new licenses every year. Those are typically turnovers of an existing business. So in our fiscal analysis in this report, we did project what those license fees would produce based on keeping a 37,000 retailer licensee population.
Now, obviously, you don't expect there to be a drop in the number of retailers given this nominal increase, nominal for businesses that are transacting volumes.
You know, we didn't project on that in here. If after these proposals there ends up, being a proposal that the legislature decides to kind of take and look at, and if we had bill language with specific language, we would be able to do a full analysis and projection and maybe look at what that might do with a recurring license fee to a retailer population. I know there would have to be some sort of assumptions made on that of if that licensee number would drop at this, at all.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Cooper to hold on to your question one more second. I apologize, but just want to know, why was it even set up this way? If you can indulge me in just the background education, just a 101 on it. Why would there be a one-time fee when we can reissue the license and create an opportunity for maybe not issuing it again to a retailer if we choose not to?
Just the background that I have in the history of the program, because I was with BOE at the time the AB 71 was passed and worked on the implementation team. I believe that the California Retailers Association had a strong voice at the hearings for that bill, and it was passed with that one-time $100 fee, and from what I understand, it wouldn't have gone through if there was an annual retailer fee. That's just the history that I have in the program.
Okay. Mr. Cooper, thanks for your patience.
Just following up on the chair's comment, a lot of licenses at the local level are reissued every year. And Mr. Parrott, I know that either CVS or Rite Aid is going to stop selling tobacco products,
right,
and Target too, so the market is going to go down. So I'm going back for the last 7 years or 8 years. It's $7 million annually. That's, obviously we're running a deficit. So how come we haven't figured out something before to address this issue? For so many years, we're running a deficit. Obviously, we're paying for it somewhere.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
For the past 7 or 8 years, you've run a deficit of $7 million per year.
Right.
So, being new to the legislature, I'm just trying to figure out, wrap my arms around it. Why are we still running a deficit? How come this hasn't been addressed before?
I think because as Mr. Kirstein talked about, as far as the history, there was that adjustment to the budget that was temporary and then made permanent as far as the shortage in the funding for that licensing program was covered by the funds from the benefiting funds from the cigarette licensing program. That was basically the way of resolving that issue.
So with some of the retail establishments not selling tobacco products anymore, it's obvious that deficit is going to continue.
As far as the deficit in licensees,
Licensee, yeah.
you know, with seeing CVS close out in Bel Air, it hasn't impacted it greatly. And you're right. We will have to see if there's a trend of that. But that licensee population still remained at about 37,000 every year, even with those other businesses closing out. Other ones are opening up because there's still a demand for cigarettes. We have talked about this before. With businesses like CVS closing out, people will still go buy their cigarettes. They'll just look for another location and would afford an opportunity for another business to crop up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Bro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question, I'd like to echo, excuse me, my colleague, Mr. Mullen. Similarly, in Orange County, they've come to me and said, with declining revenues, they're hit with about $1 million a year for collection fees. My question is, with the declining revenue pool, your costs remain the same. Why wouldn't you aggregately go down in your expenses when there's less to collect?
Well, the licensing program, we are enforcing the cigarette and tobacco products tax laws throughout California, and we still have a population of 37,000 licensees. The BOE does 10,000 retail inspections a year. Those inspections are for the BOE to be out there present in the field and to make the retail community aware that BOE is enforcing the licensing laws, and it is to protect that revenue. Without the enforcement out there, you know, that's jeopardizing those revenues to be able to go down if BOE doesn't have a presence. So, you know, even though the revenues have gone down, our taxpayer base has remained static and the same, and we're enforcing the laws, and the costs are driven by our taxpayers, not by the revenues.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about the legal cigarettes that are on the market and how we need to be enforcing, you know, whether they're legal or illegal being sold in our retail establishments.
Yeah, we also have, you know, we have the Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement at the federal level that California needs to exercise due diligence in enforcing all of its tax laws, the cigarette and tobacco products tax laws. And inspectors are out there making sure that cigarettes that are legal for sale in California, based on, you know, the Attorney General publishes a tobacco directory of what's legal for sale in California based on the Master Settlement Agreement. They're making sure that everyone's complying with those laws, and if there's contraband cigarettes for sale in California, those cigarettes are seized, and retailers are seeing that that's not acceptable. Those aren't legal for sale in California.
And just to follow up, how much revenue do you estimate is the fraudulent cigarette sales that you could be collecting with legitimate sales?
You know, I don't have that number off the top of my head. We do have an evasion estimate that's on the BOE website that was published in 2014, and I could get those numbers for you.
Okay,
it's
great.
an
Thank you so
extensive
much.
report. Okay.
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up on both those issues in regards to the first five. I know I've met with first five, both statewide, Orange County, and a couple of other areas. And I think the challenge we have is that you have declining revenue, but yet you have just as many inspections, all those other issues that have got to keep going. And so it does put the squeeze on that issue. We've looked within, and one of the issues I've offered up, and that is if there's a concern about our efficiency, because I certainly am concerned about making sure that we are not using money that should be going out to first five. I've been very open. I think the board would be very open to having state auditor come and help us. If there's some efficiencies there that somehow we're missing, then we should be open to those. So I think that we've just got that challenge that we have there, and in that declining revenue, but yet our responsibilities still stay about the same.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm also concerned about first five revenues as well, and so my office has been doing an extensive study on e-cigarettes and these vapors that are out there to try to figure out what the market looks like and how much potential revenue we could be generating, because they are not currently taxed the same way that other tobacco products are at this moment. So more than happy to share the report with you if anyone is interested in tackling this issue as well, to see if we can generate additional revenues.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Ms. Marian O'Malley, who stood up a few minutes ago when Mr. Mullen asked the question, to come up to be able to potentially offer a response as well. But I want to go to Mr. Cooper for another question before that.
Yeah, regarding these 10,000 inspections you do annually, what do they consist of?
It is BOE staff inspecting a retail location. The BOE staff goes in there. They're checking the retailer's cigarette tax stamps to make sure that they are valid California tax stamps.
And that's the inventory they have.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the retail inventory, BOE inspectors. California's tax stamp is an encrypted digital tax stamp. They scan that stamp to make sure it's valid. With tobacco products, the tax is paid through invoices. That's our proof of tax. So inspectors are making sure that they're in possession of invoices showing tax-paid inventory. They're making sure that those cigarettes are on the tobacco directory in California, legal for sale in California. And they're also doing a cursory glance to make sure that they're compliant with the Stake Act laws for that their signage is up for not selling to minors.
And most of these folks are folks that have signed up, so it stands to reason pretty much they're going to be on the up and up and not sell the bootleg products, so to speak. In some instances, I'm saying other markets, people sell, I'll call it bootleg tobacco, but most of these establishments are registered through BOE, so for the most part, not everybody, they're going to be on the up and up, though, in most instances.
Correct. They are licensed with BOE. There's a very small segment that wouldn't be licensed. What they typically find are retailers in possession of untaxed tobacco products.
But the inspections are primarily at registered places, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
But they do also go, I believe, I'm not with the inspections division, go into geographical areas and we'll also look at all of the retailers within that area, also making sure they have licenses too.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Gibson?
Thank you very much. My question was answered, but for Mrs. Moth, you would also provide me a copy of that around e-cigarettes. I'll be interested to see that report. Thank you.
By the way, I'd be happy if once you distribute the copy, I'd be happy to get it to all the committee members. Thank you.
Marianne O'Malley from the Legislative Analyst Office. I don't have much to add beyond the comments of my colleague Seth Kirstein, but in general I can just put them into some categories. Essentially your options are three, and they're not really very good options. Option one is to increase the fees paid by the distributor. And that was an issue that was discussed when this bill was first created, the licensing law, and it was rejected at that time. But you can reconsider that and increase the fees, increase the revenues coming into this program, and that would pay some of the administrative costs. That's option one. Option two is decrease the cost of the program, decrease the amount of regulations, decrease the amount of staff that there are involved working in this program area. May not be desirable, but that is an option for you that could reduce the program's cost. And the third option, again, which is not a great option, is to shift more of the costs to the general fund and away from the first five funds. And that, of course, would place greater pressures on the state's general fund and is also not a great option as well. So essentially what you're dealing with is a trade-off between three different types of choices. And they're very difficult to get your hands on. We do have the proposal by the Board of Equalization, the report that was released yesterday, and we'll be happy to review it and add any other additional thoughts that we have. But essentially, your choices are one of those three.
So I'll jump in if there's no other questions just yet. Option number two, what threshold do you put at maximizing dollars coming into the program, yet doing it with a sufficient enough of a staffing level that will not absorb further costs and take away money from the program? What are some of the thresholds that you've been able to come up with?
In terms of reducing cost to the program, you're correct in terms of if you reduce the amount of inspection, you may reduce the amount of compliance. It may not be a desirable outcome. It may not be a desirable choice. Perhaps the Board of Equalization has done some analysis of this in terms of it when they've examined their staffing patterns and might be able to give you some more information in terms of the cost-benefit ratio of the number of staff, the number of inspections, and the yield that they get associated with that.
So you're saying that no matter what, and these are questions, I'm not trying to get to a certain point because education is such a key component, and at most times education seems to be the cheapest alternative instead of capital investment or enforcement. So I'm a firm believer of that. But in order to move forward, let's say at some point there's going to be $0 coming in, let's say to the point where the cigarette sales are extremely minimal. At that point, are we still going to be expending, and is this program going to be completely reliant on general funds in order to continue the educational factor or enforcement, making sure that we still get everyone to license, or what it is that we're trying to accomplish with all the educational and enforcement? The question got a little muffled as I was trying to conclude it, but you get what I'm saying.
I think managing this program's costs, given that so much of the revenues are one-time in nature, is going to be extremely difficult. I have not looked at this program in any depth, and perhaps Board of Equalization can give you a more extensive response on that.
Any questions? Okay.
Mr. Chair, I had one more thing if I could add.
Please.
I think it was Mr. Bro had a question about the evasion, the estimate of the evasion. I did get that number. It's $214 million annually for cigarettes and other tobacco products is the estimated a tax amount that's being evaded. That's on our, that is on our website, and I'll still send that to you as well.
How much?
$214 million.
Okay. So at this point, we'll move forward to the next panel. And Mr. Ting, if you'd like to welcome the panel.
Sure. Thank you very much for our panelists. I'd like to welcome the next panel. Here to join us is Carol Delia from the Little Hoover Commission, Christine Baker from the Department of Industrial Relations, and Randy Silva and Randy Ferris from the BOE. Just want to remind everyone that if you could limit your testimony to 3 minutes per organization. As you can see, there's quite a few questions, so you'll be able to, I'm sure, comment on a wide variety of things. You don't have to just do it in your opening statement. Thank you.
Good afternoon, chairs, committee members. Carol Delia. I'm the executive director of the Little Hoover Commission. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. Yesterday, we published a report, Level the Playing Field, Put California's Underground Economy Out of Business. That's the culmination of a year's worth of effort on the part of the Little Hoover Commission. The Commission is an independent, bipartisan oversight agency. In the report, we have 15 recommendations. They focus on 3 general areas: improving accountability, enforcement, and education. Today, I've been asked to talk about the task forces, which is a portion of our report, and I'm going to go back very quickly. 30 years to 1985, our commission did a study on the same topic. We found there were a variety of different entities, 2 of them at the table, the Board of Equalization, Department of Industrial Relations, but also Employment Development Department, Franchise Tax Board, Contractor State Licensing Board, Department of Justice. There's a broad array of state departments that have a role, as well as local and federal. What we found back then is similar to what we found recently, that there's no single point of accountability, nobody driving the mothership, if you will. So they've developed task forces, which we recommended 30 years ago. We recommended a multi-agency task force. Today there are 4 generally broad task forces. One is the Joint Enforcement Strike Force. That was actually developed as a result of our recommendations. That one's led by Employment Development Department. There's the Labor Enforcement Task Force, which is led by Department of Industrial Relations, and then there are the 2 very recent task forces. The 2 older task forces are focused primarily on labor, and as our commission had wanted, we also wanted to include tax issues, criminal tax issues, and that's what the 2 newer task forces were meant to do. So in 2013, the legislature enacted the Revenue Recovery and Collaborative Enforcement Team, also known as RACE, and that was going to be this collaborative effort. It had a top tier of 4 organizations, that 3 taxing and 1 Department of Justice, taxing being BOE, Department of, or Franchise Tax Board, and EDD. Interestingly enough, in signing that legislation, the governor put a lower tier organization, Department of Industrial Relations, in charge. And from a commission standpoint, we're kind of outsiders looking in. We have 9 public members who serve as volunteers. What they saw was still a confusing jumble of alphabet soup and not clear what was getting done or who was doing what, in part because of the unusual governance structure of race. The last task force, TRACE, is the one that's actually out doing the enforcement effort. So the idea, and Randy can tell you more, but was to be the arm that would go out and act on the leads that were generated by the other organization. So quickly, just commission recommendations. Again, we saw no single point of accountability. We are suggesting that the governor appoint a point person who's outside of these organizations who can take a look and figure out how to cut through the red tape, which task forces are necessary, what's needed to be done to share information. We also, I think related to this, is looked at the amount of enforcement effort. What we heard constantly in this report, the primary thrust, was businesses complaining that this is honest businesses who are complying with the rules, that they are simply being undercut by those who are cheating. And there is no one, in their opinion, there's just not enough resources out there to enforce the many rules. So they were okay with complying, but they felt like they can't compete with people who are undercutting their bids. And this is typically in labor-dominated areas, and we heard from all sorts of different firms, car washes, janitorial firms, couriers, anywhere where you see a lot of people involved, where people can cut corners, they can call people independent contractors when they're not, they can cheat on their payroll, they can cash pay, and that's how these compliant businesses that we want to thrive in California are being undercut. So to that, we said our enforcement has been flat over the past couple of decades, the amount of money we're putting into it, but we were cautionary because we also saw some special funds that had unusually high reserves that weren't being tapped. With that, that's the bulk of my recommendations related to this, and I know we're short on time, so I'll conclude. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Christine Baker, and I am the Director of the Department of Industrial Relations and head up the Labor Enforcement Task Force in California, a multi-agency effort that enforces against the underground economy. We have consolidated EDD and DIR administrative efforts. Governor Brown directed the department to lead the Labor Enforcement Task Force on the underground economy the first year of his administration. This effort has been further supported strongly by Labor and Workforce Development Secretary Lanier. DIR, as head of the agency, developed a model, a joint enforcement program that uses targeting protocols and data to identify the egregious businesses who cheat the system rather than playing by the rules. This way we avoid enforcing on compliant businesses. We also have an 800 line and a database for tracking. The administration supports better coordination and alignment of underground economy efforts and believes that we are successful to date in this area. I would like to share with you a little bit of our progress on our RCE, also some of the areas and opportunities for improvement. As you know, the Governor Brown directed DIR to head the RRCE in his signing message. His charge for DIR was to ensure that these teams work together and avoid overlapping efforts. We have had several meetings, and we have developed a framework of governance because there are different data requirements, different confidentiality requirements, different enforcement authority, and we have developed a governance, a framework that is kind of establishes the model for this team to be working together and not overlapping with each other. It clearly defines the roles and responsibilities for all the parties at each level of participation, and it develops a set of metrics that all parties agree on to measure and monitor activity. Evaluation, data, and metrics, we believe, is extremely important to be able to evaluate the success of the program. Our RCE is finalizing data reporting needs and protocol, and key areas such as intake work group, a data analytics work group, and a steering committee are all meeting on an ongoing basis. While the effort is limited to operating on existing funds, the benefits of joint enforcement will leverage administrative costs, areas of authority, and staff resources across participating agencies. Furthermore, coordinating inspections and data sharing as permitted by law will enhance response time, eliminate activity overlap, refine targeting, and enable performance monitoring for ongoing evaluation. The network of information and authority that RRCE combines across the state has the capacity to significantly thwart the underground economy. Evaluation of RRC effectiveness will be documented as per the request of the governor in the report to the legislature on or before December 1st, 2017. I am happy to answer any questions.